Hello, and let's continue working on this project now that we have the app almost complete with everything. Let's look into how we can do the painting part. And as usual, I forgot to save to the repository, so I go to source code and commit this iteration and select push to remote. So we'll say completed iteration 7, and the user is now able to construct a color and display it on a second view. And then commit the two files and push. So we're done with iteration 7, and we have one more iteration to go. Painting on the second, and it's one iteration because it has to be done together, but it is actually perhaps one of the most complex iterations that we had so far. Paint on the second screen using the selected color. Alright, so let's start problem formulation. And in the problem formulation, I'm going to add the research part here because well, I know, but it's very new to us how to paint. So we want to talk a little bit about painting before we see in the physical world and how we can make that happen in the digital world. And then we do the scope, and finally the testing. So let's talk a little bit about painting. So in order to paint, you need something to paint on, canvas. You need something to paint with, the brush. And you need a color to paint with, which will be our paint color, which we created in previous iteration, right? Or paint the color. We'll just call it the color. I'm mixing things up. So I need three things. Imagine yourself or a painter. They have that canvas, the paper, and they have the palette of colors, and they have the brush, and the brush can be different sizes, and they put the brush in the color so that it has the color, and then use it to paint or draw on that brush. The way they draw on the brush is that they put first the brush on the paper and then drag the brush over the paper in the direction that they want and for the length that they want. Then they lift the brush up, and then they put another color and then put the brush on another location, drag somewhere, and then lift the brush. So that process of touching a paint starts with touching the canvas with the brush and color at a certain location, then drag the brush over the canvas in a direction, and finally lift the brush off the canvas. Then when you put the brush again, it's another location, and the process repeats when the brush touches the canvas again. And then you keep repeating until you are done with your painting, and you take it out and say this paint is complete. Sounds good? So that's the painting process. We need three things. And the painting process itself is that you touch, you drag, you lift. You touch, you drag, you lift. You touch, you drag, you lift. So how can we do that on a screen? So we probably just said it. Our brush will be the finger, but then we need to find the way when you touch the finger and drag, a color will be painted over the point that we drag, and so on. Yeah, so that's the research. Then we go to the scope. So our scope is that user touches the screen and paint using the color they selected, and then user can go back to the main screen, change the color, and return to continue painting. Then I want to add something, or maybe I was hesitant, but I'll add it here. We want to save the paint at the end. Save the paint. Save the final image. When you're done, you want to save it back. So how do we test it? So testing scenario 1. We'll say that user selects color blue and paint a horizontal line. Then maybe we'll draw a square or a rectangle. User returns and selects a color red and paint a vertical line. And then test scenario 3, repeat and draw a rectangle with different colors. And then finally save. Save the image to the photo library. Alright, so that's the iteration 8, the problem formulation. So now solution formulation. And the first step in the solution formulation is the model. So our model will represent the data. So what is the data that we need and how do we represent the data? So the data that we need here are the points, the location of the touch on the screen. The data we have is the image that we painted. The data that we have is the color, is the points that the user dragged over, the path that the user moved on or dragged over and took as they touch when they touch the screen, and so on. What other things do we have? And the width of the brush. Alright, the width of the brush. I'm trying to think any more. I don't think there's any more. So the location on the screen, we're gonna use a type called point. The location on the screen has X and Y. X is the horizontal and Y is the vertical from the 0, 0 point. The 0, 0 point is the 0, 0 point is the left upper corner of the screen. So you have X going from left to right and Y going from top to down. So there is a type called point that is capable of representing the point itself. So we'll put the location in a point. The image that is painted, we're gonna use a Uiimage. And actually, I know what I forgot. The canvas. And the canvas is a Uiimageview. So the canvas is a rectangle area on the screen. So I have already the view on the screen, so I can choose to paint on the view. And if you Google painting, you may find some methods doing that. But I'm gonna draw on an image view, and the advantage of drawing on an image view is I can grab that image and save it. So it's gonna be very easy to take the result as an image. So we're gonna use an image view to drag. So we're using an image view, and the color we're using the UI color. and then the points that the user dragged over. So a points is a collection of points. Collection of points. You may say I can use an array, yes, but there is a particular type called UIBezierPath, and if you are with a design background, you may have heard of the Bezier path. So Swift has a UIBezierPath library that represents a path, and you can construct that path out of points, and then it has some abilities to draw or fill that path. And the width of the brush, this will be a decimal number or a number, so we can use a float or an integer. I think it is an integer or a float. I don't remember. So let's say it's float for now. So these are the different data items and how we're gonna represent them. And then the view. So on the view, we need a user interface command. We need to add a Uiimageview on the second screen. An object of Uiimageview on the second screen. But there is a trick here. And that trick, I kind of learned a little bit about it from the previous iteration when we discussed the scope and how when you have some variables on one screen, and maybe I should get you the image of both screens so you can imagine with me. When you have a variable on one screen, the other screen knows nothing about it. So the Uiimageview, if I put it here on the second screen and I return, that everything on the second screen disappears, because that second screen is created. Pay attention. The second screen is created for the first time, or created new every time you segue to it. So if I think I have it open, if I go to paint and return and go to paint, I'm not going to the same second screen, the same object. I'm going to a new object. Every time you click paint, a new object of the paint view controller is created. So we have to be careful. How can we retain the drawing between the coming and back? When I come back to change the color and return to paint, I want to return back to my same image, but I'm actually coming back to a whole new canvas. It's like you're flipping the page every time you choose a color. So what I'm going to do is create the image view object here in the first screen and transfer it to the second screen, and in the second screen I will set it up on the view. So I'm not gonna add an image view object as we did in the launch screen from the storyboard. We're gonna create it from the code, because I want to create it in the main screen and then transition it or copy it to the second screen, so that everything you draw on the second screen is still saved on the first. And when you go back, you don't lose what you've done because you kept it on the first screen. And when you return, you pass whatever you had with you to the first screen, and then you continue working on top of it. You'll see how we're going to do that. So we add an object of Uiimageview on the second screen programmatically. Programmatically from an object created on the first screen. And then the last part is the controller. And that's where all the work is going to happen here. So first we have the first screen controller that we call view controller. So on that screen I need to create a Uiimageview with the size of the screen, and then assign that object to a similar object on the second screen at the prepare for segue event. On the second screen controller, which we call paint view controller, I'm gonna need to create a Uiimageview object, but do not initialize it. And then there are several events. First event at the view did load. When the view loads, remove the coloring of the background. I don't no longer need that, what I did in iteration 7. Remove that. Then add the Uiimageview object to the view. Then I need to respond to two events, touch begin and touch dragged or touch moved. In the touch begin, I need to get the location of the touch and then add it as a new point, as a new path, and then I need to add this, and then I need to create a UIBezierPath object. Yeah, and add it as a new point for the path. And then in the touch is moved, I need to get the location of the touch, and I need to add it to the path, and then I need to create a graphics context. Now you would not know that, so I'm telling you. Graphics context, and then set the drawing color, set the width of the drawing. My finger is the brush here, and then draw. So that's it. If I want to do the saving, then I need to add another event. Then perhaps in the view, add a button for saving. Add a button to save. And then here we add a function to save. And then use graphics context save function. And that will be it. A lot to do. Could be very confusing, and I know a lot of this is new. You're following me, but I wanted to spend time to break it down because I want you in your mind to start to separate what we're gonna do on the first screen, what we're gonna do in the second screen, and you already mentally started processing this from the previous iteration. Then on the second screen, I want you to separate between the controller scope, the view did load, the touch begin, the touch moved, the save, and all of that. So now we get to the solution implementation. And I'm going to start the solution implementation, add the Uiimageview object to the second controller. So I will start with the second controller, add the image object there, and then add the view or implement the view did load, which I defined over there. I'm not going to write it again. Then on the first controller, I need to switch back, create the Uiimageview, and initialize it in the view did load, and then copy it or assign it to the image view object on the in the second controller during the prepare for Segway. Then I go back to the second controller, implement the touch began, implement the touch end, the touch moved, and then add button on the to save, and then connect the save button to a save function and then implement instruction to save. So this is an example. If you become comfortable, that's what your iteration could look like. Very loaded, divided in so many different features. The reason I put it all together in one piece is I can't really test until I finish all of this. I can't test the Uiimageview until I started drawing on it. I can't test the touch began before I finish the touch moved. What I could really separate is maybe the save, but then I said, well, just keep it within that iteration. But as you'll see, we'll try to run tests as we go through and work on it separately, each one of them. Before we move on, I want you, because we're using a lot of new library classes, Uiimage, UiColor, UIBezierPath. We're using the UIView controller and its different features, the prepare and the touches. So let's spend some time to read a little bit more about those libraries. If you go to Window on your Xcode and go to Documentation and API Reference, Window, Documentation and API Reference, and then you start to search for the library that you're looking for. So I'm looking for UiColor, and then hit enter. So it gives you here information about the UiColor class and the language. So there's a Swift language and Objective-C, so we're working on Swift. It tells you the UiColor, what it is, an overview. The overview is usually a summary of the most commonly used implementation of that object. So it tells you all the different things that you can do with the object and give you even some examples. And then tells you a little bit about the colors and color space and how they are defined. And here is some of the information that we had. And then some of the functions in that. So first, initializing the object. So here is the init functions. And then different init functions. Then there are the different functions that we have. So there is one here setting the graphics context drawing color. We're gonna need those. We can set fill and set stroke, or set, which sets both of them. Retrieving color, if you want to retrieve the color, information about your color. There's more initializers here, some properties, so you can have some predefined colors that already exist, and some information, what does it inherit from, and these are some of the protocols, and we'll talk about protocols actually in the next module. We can also look for Uiimageview, and here is information about the Uiimageview and understanding how images are scaled and determining final transparency. So the information in the beginning is very good to give you like a lesson on how to use each object, responding to touch events, and then the members of the class comes at the end, the initializers, the different variables, the different functions that you have, which you can learn about and use. And then we also have UIBezierPath. And on the right, it tells you SDK, Software Development Kits. Since when did this class has been there? This is important for backward compatibility. So this has been around since iOS 3. We are on iOS 10 now. So this has been around for a long time. So you can use it and be comfortable that your app can be compatible if you want. If you use something that starts in SDK 10, then your app cannot be compatible with iOS 9 or 8 and so on. So that's something you look at. and then some information, and some how do you initialize it, and how you there's a move function move to move it to the current point. There's an add line to connect a line, add curve, and then current point. Where is the current point? There's move, and there should be something for oh yeah, so there's move and add line. That's how you connect them. So move is to set the starting point, and then there's the line width that allow you to set the width of the path, which is the brush size, and then there is the fill, which will fill the path, or stroke, which will stroke the path, and then there's one if you want to fill with a color blend. There's ability to do that. You can learn about it if you would like. Right, so the library, the API documentation is your best friend. Actually, my recommendation is every time we introduce a new class, spend time learning about the API documentation and reading about it. The software development process is very straightforward. By the end of this class, if you follow through the project seriously, you would have mastered the software development process. But what differentiates a developer from the other is, number one, experience. How many apps have you created? And number two, your familiarity and the depth of your understanding of those library classes and library components. And you start that depth of understanding and that familiarity by every time we introduce a class or a library, go to the API documentation and read about it. Nobody's going to memorize this. You're not going to be quizzed on it, but this is for your own information. Sometimes there will be stuff that will be above your head. You're not going to understand anything of it. The purpose of reading it is to familiarize yourself with its content. Maybe you will understand it and get very excited about it, and so on and so forth. So that's it. So we're now ready to go ahead and implement this, what I would call massive iteration. So I'll stop here on this video and we'll continue it in the next